You guys, we have two possible mic options. So if this doesn't sound good, we can try the other one. This one is preferred because then Robert doesn't have to talk into this creepy mic that I have. But
it is really creepy.
Yeah.
Now I have to know why is it creepy?
I'll take a picture and send it to you.
Okay.
Let me just put it this way. It could have come out of an adult toy store.
Oh, my goodness.
You don't have to speak into the creepy one then. Just
All right, good. Hide that thing.
yeah.
It's freaking me out.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy.
And I'm Jamie, and this is Clever.
Today, we're talking to industrial designer Robert Brunner. He's a super interesting guy. You may be familiar with his name. You are definitely familiar with the products he's had a hand in designing. For example, Beats by Dre headphones. Raise your hand if you're listening to this on them right now. Not only are they the most popular headphones on the planet, they are a modern cultural icon.
Robert's a co-founder of Ammunition Group, a San Francisco-based design studio that specializes in product design, brand identities, user experience, packaging, and service design. In recognition of their design-based contributions to society, Ammunition has been awarded the 2016 Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Product Design, an award that acknowledges not just a single product, but a whole body of work, and celebrates excellence, innovation, and the enhancement of quality of life.
Prior to founding Ammunition, Brunner did a major stint as the director of industrial design at Apple, where he was instrumental in laying the groundwork for its current design-centric ethos. He's also co-authored a book titled Do You Matter? How Great Design Will Make People Love Your Company, a design manifesto that makes a powerful argument for designing every aspect of the customer experience, not just the flashy end product.
He's worked with such brands as Adobe, Williams-Sonoma, and Dr. Dre. His works are in the permanent collections of several major museums, including the MoMA and Cooper Hewitt. Basically, he's got design cred across the board.
Yeah, he does. Let's talk to him.
My name is Robert Brunner. I'm a resident of San Francisco, California, and I am an industrial designer because I don't know how to do anything else.
I don't know about that. You seem pretty multifaceted.
I could bartend if I had to.
Okay, so let's go all the way back to the beginning. We want to know about baby Robert Brunner. Can you tell us about your childhood? I learned that you're the son of an engineer and a painter. Is that correct?
Almost. Yeah, my father was a very talented and successful mechanical engineer. He actually invented most of the mechanical technology in hard disk drives when he was at IBM. Yeah, I kind of grew up with these. Well, they were giant. They were like these 12-inch platters, that look like, LP records. And they were like all over our garage and our house. But he invented basically the mechanics that made those work, of which some of that are actually in whatever hard disk drives that still exist today. Some of that of his inventions still exist in those products. So he was a mechanical engineer. My mom was she was an artist. She was a fine artist. She painted, did some sculpture. She was a chronic craftsperson. Started her career actually as a fashion model, and then eventually had a children's clothing business. So I kind of grew up in this environment where, I had on one hand my dad, who was just, he was just always making stuff. Anything was a project, right? Didn't matter if it was developing a disk drive or creating a shelf in the garage. Everything, had prototyping and, playing. And then my mom was just always just doing stuff. I mean, we used to joke that there was no 2 consecutive Christmases that had the same theme, right? They were always something different, right? And I wouldn't go as far to say it was like an Eamesian household, but not far off. Everything, like I said, was a project. There was always creativity going on. It was just, so kind of made sense ending up doing what I was doing. But at the time, I just thought my parents were weird, like every kid.
I'm guessing you were involved in all of those projects. Did you have siblings? Was it always a family affair? Were you at your dad's side as he was engineering the shelves in the garage?
I was the youngest, and we were all pretty far apart. I had a brother and a sister. I was the youngest, and so I was always hanging out with my dad, and he was always making me do stuff with him. And I think it is interesting when you look back through the lens of where you are today. I remember I got really pissed off at him once because I bought a new tire pump for my bike of which he decided one day to take over and duct taped it into a concept model he was making of a disk drive mechanism, right? That needed a sliding component, right? And I was just like pissed out. I just bought that, right? And he's already hacked it up. But that was the kind of thing that I was exposed to, and I didn't really understand it at the time. He was testing and playing with ideas and prototyping and so forth. But in retrospect, it's kind of just made sense ending up doing what I was doing.
So it sounds like you grew up kind of just inherently learning the inner workings of everything, whether you wanted to or not.
I grew up a time without video games, without even a hell of a lot of TV. And so most of the time was spent in the garage, right, working on bikes and then later motorcycles. And then in high school, I got into electronics and always, trying to blow something up in the garage was primary pastime. And so, but I think it was, for me, very important because I just really always enjoyed that idea of making something and building and finishing and seeing it work or break or whatever. And
did you ever work on any projects with your dad where he kind of let you design it or take control of the project or anything like that?
I can't recall anything like that. He was, my dad.
You were the helper.
Yeah, I was the helper. That's, whether it was helping build something or clean the fish, right? That was, pretty much my role there.
Okay, so in adolescence, how is this manifesting? And personally, what kind of kid are you in high school? Did you play team sports? Were you on the debate team? Prom king, maybe? Science fair winner?
I was in swimming and water polo. So I did that all 4 years. Actually, I was going to try out for the football team my freshman year, but a very kind coach took me aside and told me I had no athletic skill at all. So,
man.
I had, when it came to like catching and throwing and blocking and so forth, but I had been swimming competitively for about 4 years. And I was going to do the swim team, but instead of football, I went out for water polo, which I later figured out was a much more brutal sport than football anyway.
I hear it's insanely brutal and you don't even see it because it's going on under the surface of the water.
Yeah, it's probably one of the few sports where dirty play is in fact part of the game. And in fact, it's taught at all levels. So it was just,
wow.
But it was great. It was really good. And it was something I was super competitive in. So it was great to fall into that.
Are there elements of, teamwork and collaboration that you feel like carried forward from that?
Possibly. The main thing was a lot of discipline. I mean, really, you have to be in very good shape to compete in that sport. Maybe more so of any sport, but it really is incredibly taxing physically. So the discipline of working out and it was important to me. I was on the homecoming court.
Oh.
I have to say that. Did manage to score that. But.
A lady killer, huh?
Well, the way it works in high school, if during the actual homecoming game, I mean, there's two basic courts. There's one that the football players, but since they're playing in the game, they pick like other people not in football. So I got in the non-football version of that. So
nice. So after high school, you went to San Jose State, correct? Mm-hmm. And then you started studying engineering, maybe following in your father's footsteps, but then you transitioned. So tell us about how that came about.
It showed one of the problems with design, at least during that time, in that, my high school counselor, looked at, when you have that sort of inevitable session before you graduate, said, look, you're good in math and science, you're an engineer, right? Didn't even look at it very well in art, and actually I kicked ass in shop class, right? So, but that was sort of like, you follow a technical route. So I originally decided I wanted to be a civil engineer because I thought that meant like building bridges and working on the Alaska pipeline or something like that. And then someone said, no, you'll probably end up just designing like retaining walls for people. And so I heard there was, someone told me there was a lot of money in electrical engineering. And I thought, well, why don't I do that? But I spent about a year in engineering school and I did all right, but I just found it unfulfilling. And actually in the beginning, it's not really fair because the first year of engineering school is pretty much core classes, but physics and chemistry and calculus and stuff like that, which, my grades were okay, but I just was not connecting with it at all. And I thought I'd rebel, right? And maybe I'll swing over to my mom's side, right? And decided to go over to the art department and thinking that, that maybe I'll try sculpture, maybe I knew what graphic design was, and I thought that could be cool. But I always say this, I was very serendipitous that the door that I happened to walk into the art building, as you walked in, there was this display case full of industrial design stuff, right? Renderings and models. And I just stopped there and looked at it and said, that's it. That's what I want to do, because it had all the things that I like to do of drawing and illustrating and making things. And so I thought, well, this is perfect. So I changed my major. Didn't make my dad very happy. He referred to industrial designers as the guys who specified the paint.
Oh, no.
And he said, and it usually peels off, right?
Oh, man. Industrial design had a real PR problem back then.
It is true. It is true. And he came around, but initially he was like, no, you don't want to do that. So.
Okay, so then you graduated and prospered in the industrial design major, correct?
Yeah, no, I totally loved it. I loved school, loved everything about the design curriculum, did very well in it. While I was in school, I started working at a design firm and started out in the model shop, like most everybody did, which was a great experience. But they were the kind of company, if they figured out you could do things, they were happy to put you to work. So here I was, a student working on real projects, carrying a fair amount of responsibility. But I always say that was like my, while I was still in school, was sort of my master's degree, because I got to learn how some things really happen and really kind of work with real projects with real clients and real engineers. And it was super valuable to me. Even if I was only making like $10 an hour, it was, really, really super valuable experience.
And then you ended up consulting with Apple. How did that come about?
My first job was this company called GVO.
Okay.
I met these two guys, Gerard Furbishaw and Jeff Smith, and we did the classic, after hours, we would go to have beers and plotted how we were going to leave and start our own company, and which we eventually did. First, we started this company called Interform. That only lasted a year or so. It just, for a long story, just with the other individual involved, we kind of had a falling out. So we split off and started Lunar. And that was really, really great. It was amazing. I love those guys and still great friends with them. And we sort of built this product design consultancy from nothing into being a fairly highly regarded company. But I started working with Apple. It was sort of at the end of the period with Frog Design. They were very intertwined with Apple. Mm-hmm. And because they were still in a contract, they didn't hire us to do industrial design work. They hired us to do engineering work, but it was really industrial design work. They just couldn't call it that. Uh-huh. And later I figured out it was a bit of a test, right, to see how we did, and it went very well. So we began shortly after that, after the Frog contract ended, we began a series of projects with Apple. Work was really great. Projects were great. Had a good relationship. I was approached by the gentleman who was in charge of product design to come and work for Apple as the design director. I at first said no, because I just wanted to design stuff. I didn't really want to go and work in a corporation that was actually at that time sort of outsourcing most of the design work that they were doing. Mm-hmm. And
what year was this?
That would have been around, this is going to sound like a long time ago. It was would have been about 1989, 88, okay. 89. And so I said no, went back to doing what I was doing, and which was probably a really good thing, because about 3 months later, they came back and said, no, really, you're the person we want. What would you want to do the job? And I just said, well, I think, Apple of any company should have an amazing world-class internal design organization. So if you asked me to do that and build that, that would be totally cool. So they said, okay. They said, okay, let's do that. It was really interesting. It was like the first time in my life when I just, whether I got the job or not, I didn't care that much. So I just said, well, that's what I would want. And they said, okay. And I said, learn this lesson. Well, yeah, you should ask for what you want, because sometimes you might get it, right? So,
yeah.
So they agreed to do that, and I went on this process of building that team, recruiting, figuring out where it should sit in the company, driving the process structure, the work that we were doing, all that. Did that for about 7 years or so, which was an amazing experience. And
critical to the history of Apple.
It was an important time in the company. It kind of gets overlooked because of, I always joke, right, that people ask me, how I was working with Steve, and I always say, well, I was between jobs, right, because he had left before I came, and the reason I was hired was actually to work with Jean-Louis Gasset, who was, a very challenging, brilliant, but very enigmatic individual and very emotional. And then it sort of transitioned to Scully being John Scully being the primary person I worked with. And at the end, it was Michael Spindler. But then I left, and about a year later, jobs came back, right? So I say it was between jobs. It was an important time because, we were building that internal ethos, and Johnny had joined the team, and about a half dozen of the guys that were still there. And so we really sort of began to form this idea of, what that organization and team was about. And it was interesting because everyone assumes that design at Apple has always been absolutely held in the highest regard. Well, that's not true, because we were going through this period where the company was growing rapidly. A lot of people were coming in from different cultures, like from HP and Sun Microsystems, and so they brought a different idea of how design should be treated. So it was actually quite a battle to continue to focus on an investment and importance of industrial design. So it was a really important period for the company, and out of it, of course, came that group that has made so much happen, since that time.
Yeah, you sound sort of like the guy who made sure the soil was very fertile and tilled it and got everything ready. And then from that, so much could grow.
Yeah, I wish I could see I foresaw all that. I was just at that time, trying to do a good job and trying to make something that would work really well for that company and do something with that brand and really own it. And I think that was the primary thing of sort of instilling this idea with the guys that, we own this thing. Let's make it our.
Right. So you spent 7 years building this thing, making it your own, and then you moved on. Was that just you wanted to try something new, or any regrets about that at all?
No, I probably would have been fired if I'd stayed. So no, not at all, really, because I learned so much, and I'm in a really great place. And I'm old enough now where I can look back at this lens and say, as these paths that you go through, and I've had the benefit of being able to shift directions every so often, every 7 years or so. And that period was fantastic. Made great relationships that still I hold close today. And it was a great boom for my career. In fact, I'm still uncomfortably, as it demonstrated here, still talking about Apple some 20 odd years later.
Well, we're all just so curious to know what it's like to have worked at Apple and be such a integral part of the industrial design division. It just seems like such an exciting opportunity that you have had that not a lot of other people would have experienced in their lifetime.
Yeah, the irony was, what I remember saying when I decided to take the job, I think I said it to one of the guys at Linners, I felt I was young enough to make a mistake, right? and it turned out not to be, but I thought, what the hell, I'll do this. If it blows up my face, I can do something else. It was a fantastic experience. And, a lot of the people I work with then, I still work with today. So it's no regrets at all.
So you have written a book or co-written a book called Do You Matter? How Great Design Will Make People Love Your Company. Mm-hmm. And you speak about this. Can you summarize the core message for our listeners?
It's a pretty simple message. It's really this notion that if you're an enterprise, a company, a service, whatever, that design really defines that relationship with your audience, right? The things that how you communicate, whether it's through your product, your service, your package, your retail, whatever, all those, how you connect with people, design really defines that. So I always point out that design happens whether you're overt and strategic about it or not. I mean, you're making things, you're communicating the way things look, feel. how they sound, all that is design. It's most important that you actually do it overtly, right? Instead of just letting shit happen.
Right.
And the design of the things you create is that interface plane between you and your constituents or the outside world. And it takes on a different level of importance. And, the notion of do you matter is if you're successful, right? If you're successful at it, you matter in people's lives. Right? I used to ask this question when I lecture to students sometimes, where I'd say, this was a few years ago. So how many of you people care if Dell goes out of business tomorrow? And, usually no one would raise their hand, maybe one person. And then I'd say, how many of you care if Apple goes out of business tomorrow? And of course, everyone would raise their hand. I'd say, well, why? Why do you care? Why does this brand matter in your life so much? And people would always talk about how the products make them feel, and, they feel like they're a part of something bigger, and et cetera, et cetera. So, it's, if you're successful, right, you will matter in people's lives.
Well, and you've also said that design is a process, not an event, right? Am I quoting you correctly?
Yeah.
And explain what you mean by that, because I think it's a really powerful message.
There's a lot of meanings in that, but the main one is, that design is not just a step in the process of making something. That's a very old school idea that, for example, in product design, the design exists somewhere between marketing and engineering, right? And so...
Right, engineer a new gizmo, and then designs the black box that gets slapped on around it.
Or marketing requirements come in and design concepts go out, and then engineering, manufacturing, all that. That is a very old school limiting view of design. Actually, design, instead of being that little vertical stripe, needs to be flipped over on its side. And it's always a topic of conversation, no matter what part of that chain of events you're in. Because ultimately, what matters is the experience you deliver to people. Mm-hmm. Right? And everything that goes into that, from the idea, the technology, the development, the implementation, the delivery, the communication, all of that should be done under the thread of what is it that we want people to experience, and how do we want them to feel, and what do we want them to get out of it. That should be a thread in a conversation that goes through everywhere. That's what a true design-driven company does. And so it's a very simple idea, but unbelievably hard to build in a culture, but I think it's important.
So that's what I was going to ask. Have you reached the crest yet, where it's getting easier and easier to explain this concept and people are adopting it more? Or is it still an uphill battle in terms of educating this idea and getting people on board?
It's much easier today to get leaders of companies to understand that and believe in it. It is the idea of design, because of companies like Apple and a few others, being of a high strategic importance and value in companies. So people listen and they want that. Now, actually doing it is another thing that is much more difficult. But people today, CEOs, leaders of companies, will understand and listen. In fact, they come and ask for that. Now, the challenge is actually to do that. It's not just a question of hiring some good designers and giving them a reasonable amount of money and say, go do that. It has to, again, work all through the corporation and through the culture. It really means changing the values in the company and the things that are valued in people's efforts, and what being successful means and all that. That is extremely hard stuff to do within an existing, well-established organization, but necessary, and it takes time. It's one of the reasons we really do a lot of work with early stage companies, because our ability to have that kind of impact is far, far greater when it's a small number of people who are stakeholders who are starting something new and building a culture. And if they bought into it, it's much fewer obstacles to being successful at it.
I was going to ask you if you had any experiences with a company that was fairly established, where you were able to kind of come in and make them kind of come around to your way of thinking about design.
One of the challenges with being in the role that I am in our company is that, you come in and you're working on something very specific, and that can be very successful. Getting that to spread out takes a lot of work and takes a lot of internal work. to make that happen. In our history of ammunition, we've kind of fallen into this role of helping people create new things, right? And new businesses. And that's been both with startups, but also with established companies like Barnes & Noble and Adobe and Williams-Sonoma and others, where, we've come in and helped them create something new and build out something new that they hadn't done before. And that's something we're actually, it turns out that we're pretty good at. And we've been able to do that. But, if you're going to go into a multi-billion-dollar company and change their culture and how they look at design within that culture, it has to be supported at all levels, especially the upper levels, right? You're going to be able to, because you need to get people to do things differently. And that's a huge challenge.
So Beats by Dre, you got in on that. That was very early stage, right? And that instigated a headphone renaissance, which I think we can all thank you for. Prior to Beats by Dre, they were just these big black foam shackles. But can you tell us the story of how that got started and when you reached the tipping point and it was such a huge deal? It's kind of an exciting success story.
I was involved very early when there wasn't anything, and just really Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre wanting to create audio products. And again, here I'm working with not a tech company, with a music label essentially, and helping them figure out how to do that. To be honest, in the beginning, it was just a really cool thing to be involved with. I really did not have any idea it would be as successful as it was. And it was very much about one product and making that one product happen and working with these guys to do that. After a while, we began to realize, wow, this thing is really going somewhere and really creating some cultural gravity. I give a lot of the credit, most of the credit on that to Jimmy, who's amazing at understanding how to connect with and communicate with an audience. And that was part of what he wanted to do, was to use the experience and the relationships and the means that he had to build an audience in the same way he'd done that with artists over the years. And so it was an incredible experience. And yes, when we first got involved, when I looked at it and looked at headphones, I realized that rightfully so, but most headphones were driven almost entirely by function. Mm-hmm. And, how the acoustics, of course, and the ergonomics and comfort and durability and all very important things that are absolutely critical. But all those things yielded an aesthetic which wasn't really of the human body, right? And I don't think it wasn't a brilliant epiphany or anything, but really realizing these are wearable technology. They're fashion items or things people put on their bodies. They should look good when they're on, and people should feel good about wearing them. And so with the combination of looking through that lens at the design, and then Jimmy's ability to make them culturally relevant, that's what really sort of was the catalyst, the accelerant that made that thing become very powerful.
Well, and also there wasn't an alternative to earbuds or earphones at the time, other than the big clunky black foam covered shackles. So a high quality headphone now became an option and worth carrying the extra baggage, right? If it sounded that much better. The
brilliant business idea that Jimmy realized was that, for a younger audience, there was no high performance audio brand, right? It just didn't exist. Bose was your dad's headphone. Sony wasn't what Sony used to be. Sennheiser was very esoteric. There was this big gap, right? A big design gap. And that was the opportunity for the product to grow in that audience. And the interesting thing, after, I don't remember how long it was after 3 or 4 years when things really started rolling, somebody did a study on the market and showed that actually Beats grew the market. It wasn't that they took market share away from Bose or anybody else. Those companies had still had sort of nominal growth, but what really happened was it brought an entire new audience to it and actually grew the market on its own, literally doubled it. And
wow,
it was, a testament to design, communication, street marketing, all these things, sort of making it all work.
I mean, you talk a lot about the relationship between product and user and how we buy or use things or surround ourselves with things that we use to define who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really thought of it before until more recently when I actually need headphones, because I've started exploring music making, and now sound quality and levels and all of those things are very important to me. But what I think I've really noticed beyond performance is that using a beautiful product on your body, it kind of reflects your personality, and it reflects that you really appreciate music. These objects really play such a large role in our society and in our culture. And it's really cool to watch something like that that's been around for so long just become completely redefined in a new way that feels really fresh and exciting.
It's a really challenging thing in design to do that. And we've had a lot of, in the last couple of years, with the explosion of connected devices, you're sort of looking at all these things that, you kind of figured they were done, right? That, the toaster oven, right? Great. You could find a nice one if you look hard enough. But then all of a sudden we're looking through this lens of intelligence and connectivity and redefining these things and figuring out how to make them entirely different and better. And so it's actually a challenging thing to figure out how you do that, how you take these well-established ideas of what things are and turn them on their side and create something new out of it.
Yeah, and you've designed a lot of really popular products and done a lot of great projects. Are there any particular ones that you feel strongly connected to?
Yeah, it's usually, relatively recent stuff. But, in Beats, of course, I spent 9 years and still working on it. And so, of course, those experiences through that, I think, was a strong connection for me. An early project that I did was a personal computer called Mindset. And it ended up in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I was all of 24 years old, right? But it was this product that I remember I was working for this company, GVO, at the time, and I just kind of, again, I have this thing where I just dive into stuff and kind of oblivious. So I just kind of took over the project, and it turned out amazingly well. And that was the thing that actually swung my dad over to say, maybe it wasn't such a bad choice after all.
Oh, that's the one that won your father's approval.
Well, so it's a little family story. My father has since passed away, and I also had an uncle on my mother's side who was very, very famous, a man named Herman Sheets, who worked on the original Nautilus submarine. And there's a wing at the University of Rhode Island named after him, right? And anyway, long story short, my dad went to MoMA with my Uncle Herman to look at the product in the case at the museum. And my dad was so happy because Uncle Herman always treated him like a pedestrian engineer. So made it all worthwhile. The other one is
wait, not only got approval for you from your father, but I got approval for your father from your uncle.
Yeah.
That's nice. Yeah. That's nice. That's like bowling a spare.
The other one was this little company I helped create called Fuego, which makes sort of modernist barbecues. But it was sort of the beginning of my quest to be more entrepreneurial in design. And it kind of led to the founding of Ammunition too. I had this, which does qualify as an epiphany one day, that as designers, we treat our own intellectual property really cheaply, right? People come in and they hire you to do a project, and it's a cool project, and you just want to work on it because it's cool, and you can do something really fun and interesting, and then you're paid enough to sort of, that you can make a decent living and you pay your people and it's all good, and then you see this intellectual property that you've created go out and do enormously well, right? And my current business partner, Matt Rollinson, once said, the irony is the moment that your work has its greatest value, right, when it goes out into the world, you're no longer associated with it. You've moved on to something else, and you're, getting your whatever amount an hour you get, right? And so that really made me want to do different business models, partnerships, invest in some of the companies we work with, just do different things. And Fuego was the first one where I had this idea and partnered up with an individual I worked with before and started this company, and we actually pulled it off and manufactured it and shipped the thing. And again, it was never a huge deal, but they were beautiful products. But that process of really owning and developing something, which really led to one of our core ideas here, is that when we're really embedded in business with the people we're working with, we actually tend to be better designers. We take the problem to heart more. We understand what's going on. We really push things to be successful, and we focus very much on the fact that it needs to get out in the world. It needs to happen, right? And those are all important things about our company today that kind of came from that experience with Fuego.
I love that philosophy because in your talks, you talk a lot about being emotionally invested in the things that you use or that surround you, but it's nice to hear that the designer or the design team also feels emotionally invested in that process and in that product or company.
I think it translates.
Yeah.
Yeah, ownership is a very powerful idea. That intellectual, emotional ownership is something, when you care so much more about it, you put so much more into it, you end up doing much better work.
Yeah. And speaking of better work, you won this year's 2016 Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for product design. What an honor.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Very exciting. So what does that really mean to you?
I mean, words always mean something, but we've either me individually or as a company have received a lot of awards over the years for individual products. Mm-hmm. And you're always very excited. And when a prestigious organization like Cooper Hewitt looks at your body of work and says, this is important to be recognized, and that you're doing things to further your profession and further humanity, it obviously is super meaningful, and it's really exciting. It's a great validation for our team here. And I mean, of course, I'm very proud, but I really enjoy how proud and excited the people that work here for us are about it. It's really been a fantastic honor.
So let's talk a little bit about your creative process. I'm sure it's different for every brand because every product and every project is different. But is there something that you do every time, or are there any rituals you have, or how do you get started?
There's a couple answers to that. I mean, we as a team here, we have a process of, in the beginning, of always understanding context. I'm a big believer in empathy, right? That as a designer, you have to be empathetic. You have to be able to put yourself in someone else's place. Otherwise you're just designing stuff for yourself all the time, mm-hmm. which can be successful. A lot of people have done very well at that. But, I've always felt this obligation to serve people in that way, to really understand what their needs are, what's going on in their life, and how this thing or artifact we're creating plays in that. So there's always a process of that. I've never been a big believer in research. I actually always say that if great design was born in research, there'd be a lot more great design. But it's because anybody can do research, right? What matters is what you do with the information. For me, it's always, in the beginning, having a context of what we're creating and who it's for and what would make it matter in their lives, and what problem are we really trying to solve, all those questions, right? That's important. For me personally, once we do that and sort of move into the actual creation of things and ideas, I've always found it really important to get everything in my head about the possibility of what this could be out. Some people, they'll come up with 3 ideas and pick one and go with it. I've always been someone that needs to come up with dozens of things. And what it is it's not so much, come up with 25 ideas and let's pick one. It's really this process of understanding the problem and validating my gut feeling, right? Because I end up coming back to one of the early notions of what I thought something should be. But ironically, I don't trust myself enough to just pick it then. I have to go through this process of looking at it more. It's basically what it is looking at the same thing in 25 different ways. You
have to convince your gut that it was right in the first place.
Yeah, but when you do that, when you look at the same problem, dozens of viewpoints, you begin to understand it better, and you begin to feel confident about the right viewpoint on it. And that's always been an important part of how I like to work.
So it would seem like to harness your empathy and your gut instinct. You talked a little bit about the intellectual process of sort of wiping the slate clean and then eventually circling back around to some of the things that were there already. But I'm wondering, personally, is there anything you can do to strengthen your own self-awareness or your own empathy to make you a stronger designer?
Yeah, it's funny. Some people just aren't empathetic.
Yes,
but
I know.
Then some are overly empathetic.
They're called sociopaths.
Yeah, but you had said something earlier that's really a big belief of mine. Why I actually became fascinated with industrial design is that the things that we possess hold special places in our lives, the good ones, right? And you do, in many ways, to some degree, define yourself with the things you choose to surround yourself with, and because they hold meanings and they are self-expressions of who you are. And that sort of idea of objects and tools, holding this emotional place in people's lives has always been fascinating for me. And said you have to be able to put aside your world, right, and jump over on the other side of the table to this other person's world and see through it. There's always this balance, right? Because I made the crack about some people just designing for themselves. Mm-hmm. I do believe, though, you have to bring an editorial to stuff. It's not just a matter of doing some ethnographic work and finding out what people like or what they need in their lives or the problem, and then designing all around that criteria, and there you got it. I've always felt it's very important as a studio to bring an editorial viewpoint on that and elevate the idea of what that thing is to a higher level of aesthetic and functionality and understanding. So it's always this balance between being empathetic and understanding what you're trying to create and what it means to people, but then also bringing your own viewpoint into that. And that everyone has different viewpoints on that scale. But for me, having that balance is really important. And if you're good at it, you can actually do really amazing work. So I think that's kind of important about how we like to look at things here.
Maybe not scientifically, but philosophically, do you believe that objects have a soul?
Yeah, good ones do. No, I do. I think, again, it's back to the thing I was talking about, this sort of relationship people have with things. And I think what that really is, I think what's very important to people in general when it comes to products and the things in their lives is that they can feel the hand and the mind of the person that created it, Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, and that's kind of having soul. A soulless thing, feels like it just got shot out of a factory, and it's those are those things in your life that you either don't notice or only notice when they're bad, right?
Right.
But the things you look at and you marvel at the craftsmanship, and you marvel at the way something was thought out, or the way it sits and seems to have a life of its own. All those things, overtly or not, you trace it back to, yes, somebody created that and created that experience for me. Isn't that really cool? And that, I think that's where I think when products have a soul.
So we have talked to quite a few designers so far in doing this podcast, and a lot of them, maybe even all of them we've talked to so far, told us that they didn't even know that design was a profession or a field of study until they got to college, or even after they went through studying something else. So how do you think we can bridge the gap between playing with Legos and getting to college? How do we get young kids aware and excited about design as a profession, and then it's a valid profession?
It's not just specking the paint.
I agree. I mean, because I mentioned before, that was my existence. Until I walked into the art department, I didn't really know that this thing called industrial design existed, right? First of all, I put all my kids through private schools that had very strong arts programs, and that's why. It wasn't so much that I felt like they needed to go to a private school. It was important that the school have a good arts program. Anyway, one of their more enlightened instructors, when she understood what I did, she asked me to come to the class. I think it was 7th grade. And I brought a bunch of artifacts, prototypes and products and models, and I played some Beats videos, but these kids were incredibly excited, and I could tell they were like, wow, somebody gets to do this for a living, right? They just had never been exposed to that. And, in this school, they were essentially using the design process as just a general problem solving tool, which is, design thinking, right? But they were teaching it to like 6th, 7th, 8th graders of really sort of thinking about how you work through a design problem. But what I walked away with was feeling like, wow, and then this is, again, a private school in a fairly well-to-do community. I just think, what needs to happen is more more exposure to the idea of a design profession at a younger age, before high school, early in middle school, so kids begin to understand that there is this thing called design, and there is a tool, as a process, and there are careers in that, and these are the things you do, and it is, I think, just that exposure would do a lot to really help, the next generation of designers move into our field.
I think if we still had shop class, theoretically, we could really make the connection between shop class and industrial design now. I mean, back in the day, shop class was more about being handy around the house, or maybe becoming a carpenter or a contractor. But I just lament the disappearance of shop class and the arts. And I know that we're putting a lot of emphasis on STEM education, but I'm a big believer that STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, should actually be STEAM. And there's a movement called STEM to STEAM that includes the arts in that. And I wonder how you feel about that.
No, I think it's critical. And when you do, when you study a man like Steve Jobs, that's the one thing that stands out, that he held the arts in as high regard, or possibly higher than technology, right? Mm-hmm. Because it was understanding that relationship to humanity. And I had an interesting experience with one of my sons who recently transferred from a large university studying design to a private art school. And I think he thought maybe it might be easier going to a pure art school. And he's had to work like 3 times as much as he did. And I think there's a misconception about design and the arts, in that it's all about the colorful aspects that most people see, when actually there's an incredible amount of process and discipline and understanding and research and technique and everything behind that's actually involved in creating something like that. I do believe that is, I said, that's why I've put my kids through private school, because I want to make sure they're exposed to that and understand that, and because I believe it will serve them throughout their lives, no matter what they do.
Yes.
So, I am absolutely in total agreement.
You've had a lot of successes, both in, designing products, great projects. Your company has received a number of awards, but is there a personal way that you define success?
That's a really good question. I guess I would define success by building things, right? And seeing them built, and whether that's a product, whether that's a business, whether that's a home, and it probably goes back to talking about the childhood of my parents. I mean, that's what I saw that's what they felt was success, right? Was actually making something and making it happen. And so I feel the same way, that, there's a variety of ways to measure success in terms of recognition and notoriety or financial and so forth. But I guess for me, it's always just about being able to actually build something, and build something of value. That's the thing, it's the thing why I keep doing this, because there's, every so often there's another opportunity to build something and create it and get it out into the world. And so I think that's ultimately what drives me.
So do you feel successful?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, of course, you realize you were able to accomplish some things, but I guess like anybody who's reasonably good at what they do, you never feel satisfied. So there's always more to be done.
You've talked a lot about your work, because we've asked you questions about your work, but now we want to ask you a little bit about yourself personally. You create emotional experiences through the objects that you design for people, and we want to give an emotional experience to our listeners. So that means we have to splay you a little bit open and ask you to tell us something that makes you human, an embarrassing story, or something that hints at your vulnerability.
Oh, I don't know. Let's see. I mean, the whole Beats experience was really interesting to me, because, I am just your average design tech nerd guy, right? I am not, and then you find yourself, all of a sudden out of nowhere hanging out with music industry superstars, right? It's like, how did I get here? But it was really weird, because I actually had a very good relationship with both Jimmy and Dre. And I always thought that was really odd, but I finally realized after a while that they saw me as talent, right? Just like they put me in the same kind of bucket as Gwen Stefani or whatever, right? This is a talent, right? And they really respected talent. My kids knew I was involved in this thing, but they didn't really believe me, and because, I'm their embarrassing dad, right? And all of a sudden I showed them this picture of me sandwiched between Dre and Diddy, right? and everybody's smiling, and we just look like the best of friends. And it just blew their minds, they just couldn't, it's like their whole world got flipped upside down, and like, oh my goodness, okay, there's my dad. It's weird, so that's not really an embarrassing story, but it to me, that whole experience, while completely wild, I had no right being in this situation at all. I'm about as, dorky as they come. I say about that picture, it's like I'm the dorky white filling in the hip sandwich.
So what do you think really happened? Do you think your kids thought you were cool, or do you think that Dre and Diddy sort of lost a few notches of coolness by hanging out with you?
Probably both, but actually, I'm a pretty cool dad. I mean, the stuff I do, and I won't tell you how old I am, but I still dress like I'm 25. So I don't know. That's probably embarrassing to them, actually.
That's the Bay Area way, though.
My dad has better skate shoes than I do.
Well, speaking of being a father, how many kids do you have?
Oh, this is going to blow your mind. I have 6.
6 kids?
Yes, I have.
Oh
6.
My goodness.
You
okay.
are prolific on all fronts, sir.
I am an anomaly in this world. Yes, I definitely am.
And how old?
A daughter who's 29, who's getting married soon. Another daughter who's 27. A son who's 21. A son who's 16. And then 2 3-year-old twins.
Wow.
Boy and a girl.
Oh my goodness. Were the 3-year-old, was that a surprise that there were twins coming?
Yeah, it was. I was divorced and remarried, and we got married about 10 years ago almost. And we wanted to have kids, and just like, I'll never forget when we found out. We just, sat there in silence for about 48 hours. But, now it's like you couldn't see it any other way, right? But at the time, it was just like, oh my, what has happened here?
That's crazy. I can't imagine having 2 kids at once. You have your hands full with your job and all of your children. So fatherhood's obviously very important to you. What kind of values are really important to you in terms of instilling in your kids?
Well, yeah, a lot of, it's going to sound like the usual stuff, but, you try and teach them to be honest and teach them to be, good citizens and communicative and stuff. But, the interesting thing I realized after going through it a number of times, really this whole process of raising children is a 22 to 24 year long process of making them independent, right? From the very beginning to when you're finally shoving them out the door is always this process of helping them and teaching them to be well-functioning, independent human beings. And I think that's one of the gifts I like to give them is really helping them be successful, independent, confident individuals. They don't always agree with how that's being implemented, right?
Right.
Oh, it's their job to disagree at times.
Exactly. Now it's like my 2 daughters, who one of them actually works here at Ammunition, seeing them be strong, successful, motivated people is about the best thing you could ever ask for, right? So,
yeah. Are any of the other older ones interested in design or the arts or?
Yeah, my 21-year-old son is studying industrial design.
Yes.
My 16-year-old has a strong interest in photography. My oldest is in journalism, and Emily, who works here, is a graphic designer. So yeah, everybody, they'll just form their own media company at some point.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like it. They probably could. Yeah.
And my 3-year-old daughter will probably run it because you can tell she's that kind of person. She's going to take over.
And 3-year-old daughter is Lil Boss.
You can tell she's going to be running something, either a company or a country or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I like it. Okay, you're in the Bay Area. There's a lot of fun stuff happening in basketball. Are you a Warriors fan?
I am a Warriors fan. I was, it went dormant for a while because they sucked for so long. But I remember I'm old enough I can remember when they won that championship back in the 70s. But no, it is amazing. I've been in heaven the last week, although my Sharks lost, but I'm a big hockey fan too. So between the Warriors and the Sharks, my wife's kind of sick of me coming home every night early ability to plop my butt down in front of a game. Right? So, but it's pretty amazing.
Well, what's on the big picture goal list for Ammunition?
About 60 people, about 50 here in San Francisco, and another 10 or 12 in New York. And when we started the company, this was kind of a point we said we didn't want to go past, right? Because when you start as a design studio, when you start getting bigger, multiple offices, the founders of the company get further and further away from doing what they like to do. And this is a good size for us because we can take on some very big, complex things, but Matt and I can still be actively engaged in the process of actually doing it. So as I mentioned, we work with a lot of early stage companies. We invest in them. We take equity in them. Some we actually really shepherd very closely and incubate. And I think that that's a big part of what we're doing going forward is moving further and further down that path of actually creating our own things and starting our own companies and, just constantly building that portfolio. Because it's really fun. And as I said, your ability to drive something to the form that you had envisioned it is much stronger when you're in that type of game. So I think that is really the picture here. We work with, again, a variety of companies in different ways, but we're very focused on helping the creation of new things, whether that's a company or a business or a piece of technology. That's what we like to do.
Well, what about new projects that you want our listeners to know about? Anything coming out?
I get asked that a lot, and I would love to tell you about all the amazing things going on in the studio, but then I'd have to kill you.
Yeah. How about something that's already done that's recent?
Well, something we're really enjoying is this work we're doing with Polaroid, or with one of the licensees of the Polaroid brand in developing new photography stuff. So we did the little cube action camera, and then more recently we've done a product called Snap, which is the sort of re-envisioning of the instant photography device, a printing camera, and we're on to the next round of things. So they've really allowed us to think about how to make Polaroid relevant again in people's lives, because it is a brand that meant a lot to me in an earlier time that they allowed just to degrade and be a brand slap on all kinds of stuff. So now, at least in this area of cameras, we're getting to sort of help reestablish that and have meaning in younger generations' lives. So that is really cool, and there'll be some new stuff coming from that pretty soon too.
Oh, that's awesome. Exciting.
So where's the best place for them to find out more about you on the web and social media?
Ammunition Group for both Twitter and Instagram, and of course our Facebook, and then our website, ammunitiongroup.com. Also, my personal Twitter is at RD Brunner.
Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your stories and philosophies with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. No, it's been fun. I've enjoyed it.
I almost wanted to kick it and have a drink with him and find out more about what the conversation. I want to have a drink with him and Dre and Diddy. Right? I was going to say, let's have a drink and find out what those conversations were like. I know. I would really love to be in a brainstorming session. Yes. I'd love to see when he talks about shoving all the preconceived notions out of his brain and starting from scratch, and then eventually they find their way back in. Sometimes even just those preconceived notions are fascinating, right? Because we all have different ones. I would love to just sort of crack open that skull and examine the contents. I know. I mean, he's done so many really cool projects and has this list of clients that just seems like every industrial designer's dream resume. Oh, and I wanted to thank him for redesigning the lift mustache. Oh yeah, I totally forgot about that, and I had written that down too. That pink fuzzy mustache was nasty gross. And it was like those eyelashes that they put on cars to make them look like they have eyes. It's just it was But he designed this new smaller neon mustache. The hot pink glow stash, which is really elegant and a great way to identify a lift car without being at night, without being a disgusting fuzzy lint
linty gum
Oh,
stuck
God.
in it.
I can't
Gross.
even imagine what gets stuck or like to those things in New York City, like after many, many miles of driving around.
Okay, and this is an aside, but do you think when Lyft formed and made the mustache their logo, their identifying, brand object, that they were doing a play on mustache rides?
What's a mustache ride? Wait, do I want to know?
It's a sex thing.
Sounds really gross.
It's a sex thing.
Okay, I think I can visualize what it is, so maybe we don't go there, but I don't know.
How could they not?
Oh, that's pretty cheeky.
How could they not?
Do you think that they thought they were going to be super popular to the point where they were like, guys, this pink furry mustache thing's not really working for us here?
It'd be interesting to get Robert's take on this, because maybe in the fact that it was so attention-getting and so gross, it actually did work for them, and they always knew they'd eventually have to sub it out for something a little more practical. But maybe it worked in the initial phase of really helping those cars be noticed and talked about, And then by the time they got all infested with rats and vermin, it was time to swap them out anyway. Thanks to the hot pink glow stash, that is a problem that has been eradicated from our streets. Thanks to Robert Brunner. I'm so glad he chatted with us. I want to read the book, Do You Matter? I love the idea that he asks companies, do you think people would care if you went out of business tomorrow? Because that's a really important mindset to get yourself in terms of making products that are an actual contribution to society.
I would buy or wear anything that he designs. I just feel like he's like Midas.
I think that what he's really onto is that careful consideration of the relationship that's going to be on the other side, that empathy that he talks about. And he's acutely aware that if you have ownership on the side of birthing it, of bringing it to life, then that passion is going to translate into the relationship that people have with it when ownership transfers over to that new person. I think he's very, very smart to pay such close attention to it and to really grow it, foster it within his company.
Yeah, and what I really appreciate too is that he focuses a lot on emotional connection and relevance rather than status. Because, you can think of things in society that become status symbols versus just, everybody adopting it. But he's kind of able to hit on that sweet spot where it's cool enough or well-designed enough to be popular, but doesn't really become something of superior status. It's accessible.
They're inclusive.
Yeah, I like it. I like him.
Now let's get a photo of him and Dre and Diddy.
Oh, we got to get that photo for sure.
Okay. Thanks for listening, guys. You can subscribe to Clever on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And would you do us a favor? Would you please leave us a review on iTunes? Not only does that really help us out, we totally value your feedback.
You can also find us on the web at cleverpodcast.com, where you can read the show notes for this episode and sign up for our newsletter. Plus, hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Clever Podcast. We love hearing from you.
This episode of Clever was edited by Chris Model of Your Studio with music by L1011.